Hi, welcome to week 11 of SOL Prep. Today we're going to be studying lines and curves of best fit. In this first example, I ask you which equation most closely represents this data set. They gave you the number of clients in a day. The first column, you're always going to use it as X, and then the second column, total amount of tips in that day, you're going to represent that as Y. Remember that your calculator can take these data points, this data set, and turn it into an equation that can then predict values between the numbers that are given in the data set. For example, this data set does not provide information on what would happen on a day when you get, for example, 70 clients in a day. So we can't look over to the right and exactly know the amount of tips received for 70, but the equation that we create with this data set, which could be one of these four, can then be used to plug in a 70 in the value of X, solve that part of the equation, and produce the Y value, the output, which we would know corresponds to the tips that they would receive for that day. So it's always important to remember that equations of best fit are used to predict values. So let's remember how our calculator can find this equation for us. Get out your calculator and we go to Stat, which is where we can enter data. The first item, number 1, is where you edit your lists to enter what you have. If you have information already there, you scroll up with your cursor, select Clear over the L1 and then enter, and it clears your data list. So you can enter all of the data points for X in L1. And when you enter them, make sure you double check that the numbers that are presented in the table match exactly with the ones you have entered. Sometimes there are typos and we need to fix those. Then move over to L2 and enter the Y values. Again, always double checking that your numbers were entered exactly the way they appear. Once you have checked that, you go over to the Stat again. This time we're going to calculate our equation. So you have to scroll over to the Calc menu. And because we are going to find an equation that's a line form, notice that none of these have an exponent of 2. They're all single x's with no exponent of 2. That means it's a line. So we're going to select number 4. If it had an x squared, we would be working with a curve, which is quadratic. But right now, we are doing a line of best fit. The fourth one down. Select Enter. You're going to have to hit Enter 5 times so that it cycles through all of these options. And it's going to give you information like this. Notice that your calculator first gives you the format of your equation. It says y is equal to ax plus b. I'm going to write this down here to help you follow along with what we're doing. Underneath that, it gives you values of what a and b are. For example, it says that a is equal to 2.245. We're going to round that to 3 decimal places. So we're going to use the a up to the 5. The 2 after the 5 will not cause the 5 to round up. So we know that a is 2.245. So in the location where you have the a, you are going to write 2.245. Then we can see the value of b. I'm trying to use a different color. 65.4376. That 6 will cause the 7 to round up. So really what we have is b is equal to 65.438. And that is the value that you are going to write in the position of b. So you erase b and in its place write that value. That is now your equation of best fit. Which one matches most closely, which is what our problem is asking? Well, the 2.2 is not negative. It would need to be positive, so I find it positive here. The 65.4 is positive, so I would select option B as our answer. Most closely matches. Now, we could see that these answer solutions were only providing 1 decimal place. So you might be asking, well, why was I required to write 3 decimal places afterwards? I want you to get into that habit because in other problems that we're going to be seeing in this video, we will need to use the entire equation to plug in a value of x and then obtain a solution for y. And to get a more accurate solution for y, it's good to get into the habit of writing at least 3 decimal places so that your value most closely matches the options provided in your answer multiple choice. In this problem, they say the table shows the data collected on the number of hours a group of students studied for a test and the score each student then earned on the test. It says based on the line of best fit. As soon as you see that word line of best fit, you know that when you go to your calculator, enter your data, and when you're doing your calculations, you know you're going to be selecting the fourth one down because they already mentioned it's a line. Then they're asking you which is the closest to the score a student would obtain from studying 4 hours. It would be very convenient to go down this list looking for the 4 somewhere and then looking over to find the answer, but we do not see the number 4 here anywhere. We know it should be somewhere here between the 3 and the 5. But because our data doesn't really follow exactly a straight line, because you can see that for the number 1 you're getting a 50, but then for the number 1 you're also getting a 40. So there's not a clear pattern here. You can't automatically say for 4 it's going to be between 80 and 90. Oh, so that's 85 and be done. No, we cannot do that. We have to go create the line of best fit and then use it to predict what would happen for an x value of 4 hours. So let's start by labeling our columns. Always the first one we label it x and then y. And that's why I was saying that the 4 that they want us to evaluate would be an x value that we plug in to then obtain its corresponding y value, which will be one of these options. So remember that to do that, you go to your calculator, you press Stat, and you're going to enter your data in the first option. You're going to edit the lists. Of course, they have the information there from the previous problem, so we go up to the title, press Clear, and then Enter. And we would do the same thing for the other column. Clear, Enter. So now your lists are ready to enter this information. Alright, so I've just entered the data lists. Always go back and double check that you have entered them exactly the way they appear in your problem without any typos. For example, right here, you can see that the 4 was really supposed to be a 40. So always go back and double check. Go back up to that number and type correctly a 40. Sometimes the calculator doesn't accept the number correctly the first time. Again, up here this should have been a 90 and it shows up as a 9, so we fix all the typos. You don't want to be the one that does the entire problem correctly but gets the wrong answer because you accidentally typed the wrong number. After that, we press Stat, and now you're going to calculate your equation, so you have to move over to the Calc menu. Remember that they said it's a line of best fit, so you're going to be selecting the fourth option, a line. And you're going to hit enter 5 times. And it's going to give you, just like before, the setup for the equation. Once you have this information, you copy it down. Y is supposed to equal to whatever A is times X plus whatever B is. Then you go to the second line of your calculator to figure out what A is. A is 6.273, so you substitute. And then you look for what B is right here, 49.779. So you erase the B and in its place put its corresponding value. Now what you still need to do is to look for that value that they asked you to use for X. X is supposed to be 4, and you plug it into where the X is. So really they're asking you to take the equation and substitute the value of 4 wherever the X is. And you can enter this exactly like that in your calculator, which is what we're going to do. So here we have entered the 6.273 and then parentheses 4 plus 49.779. You hit enter and it's going to give you a value of 74.8. You can write that down, 74.8, which you can round to 75. So because they're asking you which one is closest, you would select letter B, because if you round your answer, the closest one will be 75. In this problem, they give you a scatter plot where you can see the points more or less follow a straight line pattern, but it's not exactly a straight line. So they're asking you which value of x, remember that the x-axis is this bottom one right here, which value of x would best match a value of y equals 14. Remember that y would be this value. So they're asking you, if you choose this value of y of 14, where would it hit the graph to then go down to find its corresponding x value? To do that, you would have to draw the line that most closely represents the pattern that those points are following. And then based on that line, you sort of follow it until you hit the line right there. So follow the level of 14 until it hits the line. That's where you take a turn and go down towards your x-axis. That would be in the middle between the 4 and the 6. So you would call that a value of 5. So you would say that for a value of 14, the value of x that best matches that 14 would be 5. In this graph, they're asking you which is most likely the equation of the curve of best fit. Notice that it should now be a quadratic, an x squared equation, curve of best fit for the relationship shown in the graph. If you see this as a curve and you do not remember that a curve should be x squared, that's okay. You can check all 4 of these and see which one matches. You can go in your calculator, press the y equals, and enter each one of these equations, see what the graph looks like. For example, that would be your first equation. Type it in, press graph, and you would see that that graph in no way matches what you have here. So you would scratch that one out. Go back to your y equals, type in the second equation. After you've typed it, you hit graph. And again, what you see does not match what they're showing you, so you scratch that one off. Go again to y equals, type the next one, making sure you type it exactly the way you see it there. You hit graph. And what little you see of the curve, you can see that it's opening upwards, so that does not match what we have here. The option has to be D. Let's double check. Go back to y equals, type in your new equation. Make sure what you have typed matches exactly what you see, and then you hit graph. This graph is the one that most closely matches or fits the best through these points. As you can see, it's a downward curve, so you would select option D. In this problem, they give you a relationship between x and y, so they give you the data set, and they're asking you which equation represents this relationship. By now, you should know that you go to Stat, you enter your data, and then you hit Calc, and then you select your calculating your equation. But right now, what we notice is that some of them have an x with no exponent, which would be a line, and some of them have an x with exponent, and those would be quadratic. So when we go to our calculator, how do we know whether we need to pick the fourth option down, which is for lines, or if we need to pick the fifth option down, which is for quadratics? How do we know which one to pick? Well, when that happens, that's when you go to your y equals and you type in each one of these options and check their table of values to see which one has a table of values that matches exactly what was given. So let's start with the first one, 2x plus 1. typing in the equation, and we want the table. If you look up here in blue, it says table, so you have to select the second blue button and then graph button. It'll give you the table, and you have to see if the 1 shows, if the 0 and the x shows up with the 1, which it does. The 1 should show up with a 2. In this case, it shows up with a 3. The 2 should pair up with a 5. That one was good. And the 3 should pair up with a 10. Here it pairs up with a 7. So this is close, but not exact. So we try the next one. Go back to y equals and replace this with the next one, which was 5x minus 5. After that, you hit second and then the graph button to see the table, and you check to see if that matches. The 0 does not have a 1, it has a negative 5. The 1 is paired up with a 0 here. It should be paired up with a 2. 2 and 5, that matches. 3 and 10, that matches. So again, this half of them were close, but not exact. So we try the next one. Go back to y equals, clear out the equation you have, and type your new one. So now we have a quadratic because it has an x squared, and we go check its table. In this table, the 0 matches the 1. The 1 should be with a 2, and it is. The 2 should be with a 5, and it is. The 3 should be with a 10, and it also is. This one matches exactly. So that's a really good contender here. But just in case, you might want to check the last one. You type in your last one and look at its table, just so that you can see that there really will be just one option that looks exactly as your table. As you can see, the 1 is not paired up with a 2, the 2 is not with a 5, 3 is not with a 10. So you select the equation whose table matches exactly with what was provided. If you get a problem where none of the equations match exactly, then you're going to pick the one that matches the closest. So of all the other ones, the second one that was closest would have been A, but here in this case it matches exactly. In this last problem, they ask you which equation best represents the data set. They're really asking you for a line of best fit, so it's the same procedure again, except instead of them giving you the information in a table format, they give you in coordinate point format. But we already know that all the x's are the first value in any coordinate given. So those would be your x's. That would fill the x column down, all the blue ones circled here. And the y column would be all the y values in each coordinate point. Make sure you include their sign, negative, wherever they are, correctly. Those would be all your y values that, following the same order in which you enter the x's, you would enter the y's. So translating all of these coordinate points into a table, which is what we're used to seeing both in a calculator and in the problems, would look like this. Again, when you go to a calculator and you need it to calculate an equation for you, you will need to select whether it's linear, that it just has an x with no exponent, or quadratic, where it has an x squared. And as you can see, the options that they've given us, some of them have x squared, and some of them have just plain x. How would we know which one to choose? Well, the easiest way to solve this type of problem would be to, again, just like in the previous problem, enter each one of these equations and see which one has a table that best matches what we have here. So let's start with the first one, a quadratic, because it has an x squared. Go to your calculator, y equals, type in that equation. Make sure you have typed it using the correct signs. If they're all plus, in this case you write plus in between. And to check out its table, remember you have to press second first and then go see its table. Notice that the table starts at -4. If your table shows up starting at 0 and going up, you're going to have to scroll up to find your negatives. We want to find that -4. And right there, that negative 4 has a positive 5.7. Negative 3 has a positive 2.2. These numbers are very far away from what we're supposed to be having here, negatives. So I'm not really going to consider that as an option. Let's try the next one. Go to your calculator, back to y equals, erase the one you had and type the new one. This new equation is very similar to the previous one, except the plus has now become a minus. So make sure you have entered that correctly in your calculator. Go to its table to check it out. Second table. And the negative 4 is paired up with a negative 4.1. That's very close to the negative 4.8 we need. Negative 3 is paired up with negative 7.6. Pretty close to the negative 8.2. Negative 2 has a negative 8.9. Close to the negative 9.1. And same deal for the negative 1. It's paired up with a negative 8. And we see it should be a negative 8.1. All the way down to the positive 1. They're pretty close. They don't match exactly, but they're close, so I'm going to mark it as very close. Now you try option C. In y equals, you type it, and then you go to its table. Second graph to see its table. The values that they show here for negative 4 all the way to positive 1 don't really match as closely as the one we saw previously. So I am not going to consider that as one of my options. Lastly, we try the last option just to make sure that it doesn't match exactly. There it is, and you press second table. And the values they show for y1 are even farther away from the targets that we want as compared to option C that we just saw. So we're not going to consider that one. So even though in this case we did not get an exact match in our numbers, we did find the one that was closest, option B. So you would select that as your option. Thank you.